We have begun.
Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on safeguarding your financial institutions. Andrew, I'm going to hand it back over to you so you can go over this, and then we'll get started to the meat of our presentation.
Thank you, Natalie. So basically just some of our housekeeping checklist, I like to call it. Audio check. If you encounter audio issues, kindly check your speaker's volume settings first. And webinar recording, we understand your busy schedules. Rest assured, we'll provide a recording of the webinar for your reference after this engagement. And this is interactive. We encourage your active participation. Feel free to engage with us through the chat, video, or discussions during, after, whenever. And ask questions. If you have any questions, you could use Q&A button to ask questions at any time. And anonymous queries, if you prefer to keep your questions private, please feel free to direct messages to any member of our team. We respect your confidentiality and won't disclose your name when addressing your query. Exclusive reward: as a token of our appreciation for the participation, each attendee who stays with us the entire webinar will receive, it's $100 Amex gift card, not 75. I forgot to change that.
Ooh.
This is the last one in our series,
Ooh.
so we up the pot. And then resource asset. In case you miss any valuable resources during the webinar, please don't hesitate to email us at my email address, achapman@westtechsolutions.com for access.
All right. So let's do some intros. I'll let you start, Jason. Mute.
Hi, I'm Jason Hansen. I'm the security officer here at West Tech. I have 20 years experience split between MSPs and in banking. I'm also a CISSP and a CISM with extensive in financial and all other industry security.
Awesome. Andrew, since you didn't share with us, why don't you share with everyone your illustrious background?
The one line.
Yeah.
My name's Andrew Chapman, sales director at West Tech Solutions. Been in the MSP space for 15 years, technology space for over 20. And I currently lead our sales team here at West Tech Solutions in providing solutions, managed service, and security offerings for our clients. So excited to be on this call. I've been with you on the call, Natalie, and we're excited to have you as our guest presenter. So with that, I'm going to Natalie Suarez.
Yes. So heavy emphasis on that 25 plus. So heavy emphasis on that plus in IT and cybersecurity. I'm never changing that. And I do have a technical background. I was a software developer when I started this whole thing. And now I come on and I speak to people like all of you here and tell them about cybersecurity, and not just the bad stuff, the good stuff too, right, Jason? Because there's some good stuff. And with that, let us go ahead and jump in. So our agenda for today, just to give you a heads up of what's coming down the pipe here, we're going to start with metaphor. We're going to talk about some of those SMB concerns, and we just love acronyms in this industry, don't we? That's just small to mid-sized businesses. So that's those of you who've joined us here today. We're going to talk about a real phishing as a service attack and explain what the bad guys do, how they're thinking. Then we're going to grab into the meat of this thing, and we're going to talk about that New York City code, code and rules and regulation compilation, the official compilation of codes, rules, and regulations. That's quite a mouthful, isn't it? We'll talk to you about how to protect your business, talk a little bit about risk and responsibility, I think. I don't know. We may not. Let's see where this goes. And then we're going to end with an analogy and end with some Q&A. And like Andrew said earlier, feel free at any time to ask us any questions. We have Andrew watching our backs here, so if anyone asks a question and Jason and I don't see it, he will interrupt and let us know, and we will answer right away. So let's start with that metaphor, right? So the metaphor is we want to have everyone singing from the same sheet of music. So how do we do that? We bring in a bunch of definitions. Good times, right, Jason? So let's start with a little humor, right? One of my favorite movies, The Princess Bride. And the reason I use this is because cybersecurity is just one of those words. Say that 3 times fast, Jason. Go ahead.
Cybersecurity, cybersecurity, cybersecurity.
See, it lost its
Yeah, I'm a
meaning, didn't
professional.
it? What it's really about, heck, if you can't have some fun, right? Cybersecurity is really all about managing risk. And we understand, right, that this is a cost center for most of you here on this call. And it's not going to make sense to deploy cybersecurity protections, whether that's a technology or a policy or some type of training like security awareness training, unless it's going to reduce your business risk or save you money. And I would even pose here that there are actually cybersecurity things you can do that actually improve your business processes. And I will die on this hill that I'm about to present here. A password manager. A password manager saves you time. Once you learn how to use a password manager, it is going to make it so much easier for you to have unique and complex passwords for everything. And it's going to make it easier for you to change those passwords when you need to. And I see my buddy Jason shaking his head, yes. And you know what, guys? Time is money. So it will save you money to deploy a password manager. Some more fun terms, right? So I know we've done this a couple times, but I just felt, we should add these terms. So I did. And they're really important that we all understand when we say certain words, what we mean. So 3 very important words in cybersecurity are attack or an event, an incident, and a breach. Incident and breach. You should never ever use those terms. Pretend I didn't say them. This is kind of a do as I say, not as I do type of moment, right? And unless you're directed to do so by a cyber professional, whether that's your cyber insurance, whether that's someone like Jason, whether that's your legal counsel, those terms come with a lot of baggage. An attack or an event, that happens all the time. And all that is someone knocking on your door, right? That might be something as simple as a bad guy doing a bunch of port scans to see if you have any open ports that they can get into. Maybe they've bought a password, a username and password list on the dark web, and they're automatically using that to see if they can get in. Those are what we call events or attack. And as you see on this slide, the University of Maryland, a very reputable source, states that this happens about every 39 seconds. So this is pretty much continuous. Now, an incident is different because an incident is something that compromises what we call the CIA triad. That is not that scary 3-letter agency here in the US. That is confidentiality, integrity, and availability of an information asset. So, for instance, a distributed denial of service attack, that would be an incident because that would prevent you or maybe your customers or clients from accessing your infrastructure. Then a breach, this is the really bad one. The breach is not just potential exposure, but an actual confirmed exposure of data, meaning someone who wasn't authorized to see that data has seen it and is probably either encrypting it or trying to sell it on the dark web to the highest bidder. And before I move on, Jason, you have anything to add to any of this?
Yeah, and for our financial people, the breach is really important because
Mm-hmm.
they've changing the definition of it. So before it would be like just emails leaked. Well, that's technically no longer a breach. A breach has to be multiple things. So it's got to be identifying information, account
Mm-hmm.
information, stuff that can correlate it together. So when we talk about using these definitions correctly, that's what we mean. Because if you do say it wrong and you say you got a breach and you're in the financial institution, your first question would be, well, did I notify the NYDFS? Because I need to notify them within 72 hours of a breach. So if you've got an actual breach, that is an actionable actionable, not only to resolve it, but from
Mhm.
reporting to up channels, up to any regulatory bodies, up to management, board of directors. They all need to be aware of this for almost pretty much from the moment it happens.
Exactly. Thank you for adding that clarification. So let's talk about some of the concerns you might have. Well, a lot of times, I just finished telling you cybersecurity is all about risk, right? That makes it a business challenge. Now, there are certainly IT components of that challenge, but it's not solely an IT challenge. You may be dealing with the complexity of shifting to a remote workforce. You may have limited cybersecurity skill set or IT skills within your own organization. You may not have a written and practiced business continuity plan or an incident response plan. The time, when you're in the heat of the moment, whether you have an incident or a breach, or you're trying to determine whether you have had an incident and a breach, that is not the time to figure out what we should do when something like this happens. We really need to think about these things before we're in the crisis mode and come up with a sensible plan and practice it. Inflation. I like to say the cost of eggs, bread, and milk have all gone up, and so have the cost of responding to a cyber incident or breach. Legislation. We're talking about this regulation today, right? And not only does this regulation apply to you, but did you realize if you have a customer that's in Utah or California or the UK or any of those regions, you have to pay attention to their cybersecurity regulations as well, because these regulations and laws are based on where your client's located, not where we're at. Cyber warfare, that's a particular point of interest just to me. I do come from a Department of Defense background, and we think, in kinetic warfare, it's interesting. This was just brought up in a podcast I listened to a couple days ago. They were talking about cyber warfare. That well, number one, the U.S. actually is in a cyber war, whether we choose to believe it or not, right? And number two, like these events like Ukraine and Russia, or the Houthis and Israel, right? There are components of cyber war to this. In kinetic warfare, when that's over, we take away the supplies and the weapons. You don't get to keep your tank or whatever those large weapons are called. I can't recall what they're called right now, the big guns. But in cyber warfare, you're not going to take their laptop away from them or their keyboard, right? So when they're otherwise no longer occupied with that, what is going to happen to the rise of ransomware? I think that was the answer. It's going to rise, right? Um, and small businesses, you can't discount reputation damage. I'm sure you have many stories you could share on reputation damage for SMBs, don't you, Jason?
Oh yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
I had a marketing company. They wouldn't think that they were going to be the type that was hit. They
Mm-hmm.
got hit by ransomware, and now all of a sudden deadlines weren't being hit for ads.
Mm-hmm.
They couldn't produce that, and more importantly, they couldn't produce historical data. So they couldn't even bill
Mm-hmm.
because their billing system, all their
Mm-hmm.
data, their invoices were encrypted. They were out 30K just to try to get their data back. Only got about 70% of it, and within a year, the organization had to, it folded because they just lost too many customers, and
Yeah.
they lost that reputation. And it's huge hit because you have to report all this. Word gets out when people can't getting services.
Mm-hmm.
It gets noticed, and then
It
people
does.
are not going to want to continue. I closed an account with a financial organization because they had a laptop stolen, and that laptop was unencrypted, and the user had a spreadsheet of every customer's account number, username, everything. It was like they had a whole thing unencrypted. And when I went to close it, they pulled up the document, and it was a new form, you could tell, and they put a big checkbox next to the cybersecurity incident as the reason it was closing. So it can really affect everything.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And actually, when we talk about reputation damage too, it's really important because in this day and age, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Really, how you handle an incident publicly or a breach publicly is really important. I mean, me personally, I'll never do business with LastPass because they out and out lied. For those of you who don't know, that was a password manager. I mean, it still is a password manager, but not one that I will use because they were not honest and forthcoming with their information when they did experience an actual breach, not an incident.
And my favorite just on that one, they also released the email like on Christmas Eve saying everyone was breached. So they
Mhm.
waited until the Christmas holiday to be like, hey, also your stuff has been hacked. You should really take action
You
over
should
the
really do
holidays while you're
something.
probably not paying
Yeah.
attention.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Great. Thank you. Thank you. May I have another? So I do like to use stats from reputable sources. I'm sure everyone on this call has heard of Verizon. You may not realize they produce this report. I think it comes out in about June or July of each year. So this is reporting on the 2022 data in their 2023 report, if that's not confusing enough. And we will soon get 2023 in 2024, right? um, so they're saying from Verizon that um, that the way they're getting into your business, almost 50% of the attacks is credentials. And honestly, the way they're getting these credentials is there are multiple ways. One of them is, hey, someone at your business may be using their work email and a password, the same password to access social media. And I'm talking LinkedIn, Instagram. I'm not even going to talk about TikTok. If you're using it, please stop. Right? Um, and notice the stat right underneath this from the University of Maryland again. 82% of ransomware attacks target SMBs. And you guys have to realize, and more's coming up about that, this is all automated. There might be some, super nerds like me, but I'm not a black hat hacker. But there might be some super nerds that are still sitting on their basement, pounding on a keyboard, but those are few and far between. These are full enterprises, which we're going to show you, right? And let's go into that. Oh, look, it's time for a quiz. So if our audience would like to play along, what percentage of breaches do you think involves the human element? Come on, people, let's answer this question. This is a safe environment, right? No judgment here. And it's probably just as bad as you think it is. 74%. Does that mean that humans are the weakest link? No, it does not. It means that we're human, right? We're also your best defense. Humans are actually your best defense. Having a good culture of cybersecurity and having good security awareness training are really key to reducing this number. You can see we're doing better, right? Down from 82% from the previous year. And really, not even 20% of this is insider threat. I think the actual number is 19% is actually insider threat. Most of it is people making mistakes. And why do people make these mistakes? It's not necessarily that they don't know any better. Think about it. I think about the only time I'm not multitasking is when I'm doing one of these webinars and I'm focused on everyone, right? But other than that, do you think I'm not single threaded? I'm working on 100 things at one time. How about you, Jason?
Oh yeah, all the time.
Right. And one thing that has not changed with phishing emails in particular, or the bad guys in particular, is they always like to impose or impart a sense of urgency. So if you ever get an email that imparts a sense of you need to drop your entire life and do this now, your spidey sense should go off. And maybe you shouldn't do what they're asking you to do now. That would be a really good piece of advice. Any other advice you would give, Jason?
It's really, yeah, just to pay attention. Especially like when the now with like MFA stuff. Like if
Mm-hmm.
you get those, you get a prompt on your phone to approve a logon, and you just go ahead
Mm-hmm.
and mindly do it. But then you're like, wait, I didn't log in anywhere. And then all of a sudden your account's compromised, even though you had MFA. But they'll even just try to wear you down by sending that prompt 1,000 times and hope you
Yes.
mess up once.
Yes,
Yeah,
they
so
will.
they're very persistent. So it's really paying attention. And what I always would tell everybody is just slow down, take
Mm-hmm.
a second. If everyone would just slow down a couple percent, obviously it's going to hurt productivity, and you don't want to be told that. But from a security standpoint, just
Mm-hmm.
taking the time to read what you're looking at, it's
Yeah.
going to be huge. And being able, because there's all these little clues usually. So if you take the time to read, you'll start to spot them.
Yeah. To me, the biggest clue is always that sense of urgency.
Yep,
Um, I've never seen an attacker, whether it's a phishing email or social engineering, they always have a sense of urgency for what needs to happen next.
for sure.
Yeah. So remember, I was going to tell you about what these bad guys are doing now. So they are actually organized crime. They are full enterprises. Anyone who can get access to the dark web, and that includes everyone in this call. You do a quick little Google search, you will find, I'm sure you'll find millions of YouTube videos that tell you how to get to the dark web. If you like to read directions, I'm sure you'll find many checklists of how to get to the dark web. Super easy. Anyone can do it. So today, all you need to be a bad guy is you need, and guy includes men and women. The only thing you need to be a bad guy is access to the dark web and some cryptocurrency. And if you want the data from one of those groups, CLOP, you don't even need access to the dark web. They published a bunch of their stuff from the Move It breach on the internet. Right?
Yep.
And they will offer you help desk. They will offer you payment processing centers. They're truly a full enterprise. Times have just really changed. And, Jason just threw out a stat that this marketing company got about 70% of their data back. And guess what? That was above average. And they still went out of business, right? I believe 60%, the stat is 60% of SMBs, small to mid-sized businesses that experience a breach are out of business within 6 months. As you see right here, your chances of recovering your data are very slim, even if you do pay. And more lessons learned. So there was a very prolific group called Lockbit. Lockbit was recently taken down. They're back. Sorry, spoiler alert. By international coalition, including the U.S. And people were arrested, and they seized a bunch of assets. And Lockbit was one of these criminal organizations that has an affiliate program for ransomware as a service. And they promised they pinky promised, as a matter of fact, that's the strongest type of promise, in case you guys don't know. They pinky promised that if you paid their ransom, that they would not release, they would not only would not release your data, but they would delete it. What do you think was found by law enforcement when they seized Lockbit's assets? I'll let you answer, Jason. What do you think was found?
Yes, they found all of the data that was supposedly deleted.
Go figure. The bad guy didn't keep their word. It's crazy. So one of the changes I actually made to this slide, just so you guys are aware, Andrew and Jason, is I actually added hyperlinks to all of these. So if you PDF this and send it to anybody who wants, they can actually read the whole story. So I have some financial stories on here. I have a story about audio jacking and chat GPT. These are some of the things that happen with AI. Pig butchering is also something that can happen with AI. We need to be aware of new technologies, because these new technologies, like I said, I like to have some good news too. We're using them for good, but anything that can be used for good can also be twisted and used for bad, right? So one of the reasons you should be concerned about this chat GPT breach is something I mentioned earlier. People using the same login credentials for their corporate environment that they're using to access things like chat GPT or their social media. And those get breached, credentials end up on the dark web. Somebody buys that list, and then they're off to the races trying to break into your environment, and unfortunately getting in a lot of the time. And there's just some additional financial stories on here. This story about cybercrime and the ecosystem. This story is about what I just told you about, ransomware as a service. Audio jacking is using deep fake generative AI to basically interrupt audio transactions and to sound like a real person. It's like we have to have MFA in our conversation and our videos now. It's really scary. That is really scary. Sorry, guys, not to sow any fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Anything you want to add to any of this, Jason?
No, I mean, as we, ransomware as a service, I mean, that's still a big thing. I don't know if anyone really followed the Change Healthcare ransomware breach that was just earlier this
Yes.
year, where that ransomware attack brought down pharmacies. That affected people getting timely access to medication. So not only is there a financial hit, and some of these, there's life and death on the line if these
Yes.
organizations don't protect themselves.
That's true. As a matter of fact, one of my podcasts was saying about this Change Healthcare that 1 out of 3 Americans was actually affected by that breach.
I couldn't get a prescription. Thankfully, it was
Mm-hmm.
non-critical, but my pharmacy couldn't fill it for a week.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know we've gotten to a point with technology. It's so funny. A lot of people don't know how to operate without technology. So, that's something you have to consider. So let me go through this phishing as a service attack. I want to do this really quickly because I do want to get to some more of the stuff on the regulation. But basically, this is an actor in the middle attack. As you will see, we have a bad actor here in the middle. We have a user who's gotten a phishing email, and the email is from Microsoft, and it says, your credentials have been compromised. Your username and password have been compromised, and you need to click here right now, sense of urgency, to reset your password. And unfortunately for this guy, we'll call him Bob. Bob clicks on the link. Now, everything is encrypted. That means when you see HTTPS on your web browser and you're not getting any certificate warning saying that your information can be read in clear text, it just means everything's encrypted. We used to tell people 25 plus years ago that that was a sign that everything was okay. It's not. All it means is your communication, as you see in this diagram, between you and the bad guy is encrypted, and between the bad guy and office.com is encrypted. All that means is the bad guy can't read it in plain text, but you'll see that this bad guy doesn't care about decrypting anything. So unfortunately, Bob clicks the link and he is forwarded through the site. And I'm going to greatly simplify this. So close your ears for a minute, Jason, because this isn't going to be 100% technically correct, but we're going to just simplify this for explanation reasons, right? We're going to call this server in the middle a proxy server. And all a proxy does is send information from one server to another, one computer to another. And that's how this acts. So everything is going to pass through the bad guy. And no, this is not something the user would actually see with their eyes, right? We actually need some tools and processes to actually see this happening and stop this attack. And Jason was talking earlier, this is one of those attacks that defeats multi-factor authentication. So what happens is the site forwards the credentials to Office. Office goes, hey, I've got a valid username and password, so I'm going to prompt for the multi-factor authentication. We could do a whole nother webinar on the different types of multi-factor authentication. So we're not going to go into the debate of what's good and what's bad, but this is not phishing resistant MFA. Let's just put it that way, right? And what is going to happen is again, Microsoft got the correct credentials, so it is going to prompt for that multi-factor authentication code. And Bob is going to get that prompt through the proxy server, and he's going to complete it. So say for argument's sake, he gets a code on his cell phone, and he inputs that, and the bad guy is going to forward that to office.com. Well, unfortunately for us, what happens at this point is office.com creates this beautiful little package with a pretty little bow on it. We call this beautiful little package a session cookie. And this session cookie has everything that bad guy needs to now be you. So the reason I'm telling you this is because I want you to be aware that you need what we call defense in depth. Defense in depth to protect your organization, and defense in depth to comply with this new regulation, right? So what would have saved us? Security awareness training would have saved us because Bob would have known not to click. Now, if Bob was not focused and didn't take that minute to slow down and he did click, the next thing that could have saved us is a good culture of cybersecurity, meaning that Bob realizes he made a mistake and he knows who to go to and say, yo, I made a mistake. I need somebody to help me out here and to nip this in the bud before it becomes a full-blown incident or breach, right? Other things that would have helped us, well, if you have a security incident and security information and event management, talk about slowing down, event management system deployed, that could see the network traffic happening. That could also do things like alert us if the bad guy tried to use his credentials to log in. Say Bob is logged in, I'm in Tampa, or, or he's logged in New York, because this is all about New York, right? So say Bob's logged in from New York. Bad guy logs in from Lithuania, just because I think it's fun to say Lithuania, not because I have anything against Lithuania. And it's not possible for Bob to get from New York to Lithuania in 15 minutes. So the SIM raises an alert, says, hey, somebody needs to check this out because this doesn't look right. Say this attacker takes advantage of these credentials, and a lot of times what they'll do is they may exfiltrate data through email. They may propagate a bunch of different emails, either maybe to your clients, trying to maybe divert payments, maybe say, hey, we have new payment information. This is the new way you make payments, and they take your payments. They may use it to try to propagate malware throughout your organization, but a SIM could also detect when they do this, they create and delete and redirect your email to different folders. They create and delete roles and redirect emails. All of those actions can be detected by a SIM. As a human being, you would have to be in the exact right place at the exact right time to see this deletion, this creation and deletion of lots of roles. But a SIM can see that for you. The other thing is if they're trying to propagate malware throughout your organization, and they send some fake documents, and someone clicks on a link in a fake document, which really turns out to be malware, and endpoint detection and response understands application behavior. What I mean by that is if it's a Word document, the EDR knows that a Word document only does certain things. And one of those things is not to launch another process on your system and try to run something. So if it did try to launch something, it could stop it in its tracks. So that's just some of the ways. There are many others for defense in depth that could help you, but that's just some of the ways. Do you have anything you want to add or clarify on that, Jason, before I move on?
No, I will say that I see this attack every day in our clients.
It's very common right now.
I dealt with two just this week and remnants of
Mhm.
one this morning right before I got on the call. So this
Mhm.
is so common, and it's just happening about 39 seconds. Every 39 seconds this is
Mhm.
coming across, it seems. So
Yeah.
this is, while it seems extra scary, it seems extra technical, but I will say this is happening all the time, and that
Yes.
user education piece is so important, and that slowing down to pay
Oh
attention.
yeah. Yeah, and there's so many I mean, we have it across people, process, and tech. Across all three of those pillars, there are ways to stop this attack. And if you just deploy defense in depth, even if someone does make that mistake of clicking, and even if they follow all the way through and their credentials are compromised, there are ways to stop this bad guy. And the moment we've all been waiting for, another quiz. So we are on a webinar, so it's probably easier to ask you guys to look at those items on the left. And I want you to tell me, of those items on the left, which one of those do you think is worth $1? And which of those do you think is worth $11 million last time I checked? Um, and also, I'm going to add another one in here, but okay, I'll add it after you do that. So I'll give you guys a minute. Okay, time's up. Fastest minute ever. Here's all my resources. So our social security numbers as adults were super boring because we use our credit. Is only worth $1. Last time I checked was probably in January, so I don't know if it's still at 11 million, but I'm sure it's still worth a lot. An infant social security number is worth a lot of money. And the part of the reasoning behind this is if you think about it, back in the good old days, 25 plus, remember I said emphasis on the plus years ago, you didn't get your social security number at birth. I didn't have mine until I was 15 and ready to drive. Now you get them at birth. And infants don't apply for credit cards or loans or anything like that. And that's why theirs is worth so much, because bad guys know this and they have figured out if they can get an infant social security number, they can wreak a lot of havoc before anyone figures out what's going on. Now, there is a way to stop this. I would highly advise you, if you have an infant, if you have any child, you should lock their credit report with one of the major reporting agencies so that this doesn't happen to you. And oh, I see Andrew. Andrew, do you have something to add there?
No, I just went visual. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Hi, welcome back. Another thing on this list, access to a corporate network is only worth about 2 to 4K. And think about this for a minute. That doesn't sound like a lot of money, does it? Especially if my potential return on investment is a really big payout. So if I'm a bad guy, a threat actor, or a wannabe threat actor, that's not a lot of investment on my part to really make you have a bad day as an organization, is it? No. So now, drum roll, the part we've all been waiting for, the NYCRR compliance. I'm putting my serious voice on now.
Hmm.
So This refers to the cybersecurity regulations. And Jason mentioned earlier the DFS, that's the Department of Financial Services, the New York State Department of Financial Services. They implemented this new rule. And the aim or the goal of this is to protect sensitive data and information that financial institutions hold, to prevent things like someone at a financial institution having a spreadsheet with all of your information on it that is totally not encrypted, right, Jason? And this is based on what we call the NIST framework. That's the National Institute of Standards and Technologies. NIST, as many of you may know, is a US agency, but this is actually an international standard. It is a common cybersecurity framework that is used worldwide, translated into many different languages. So, what are the key points in really small type? So, who does this apply to? This applies to all the entities regulated by DFS. That includes banks, that includes insurance companies, other financial service providers. It states that you must have a cybersecurity program, and it states you must have a comprehensive cybersecurity program. And to me, as a cyber professional, that means defense in depth, which we just talked about, right, Jason? And you must have a designated cyber chief information security officer. That is somebody who is in charge of your cyber program, who's going to oversee that program, and he's going to implement that program, and he's going to report to your board of directors. You must do regular penetration and vulnerability assessments, and those are two very different things that sometimes get confused. So a vulnerability assessment can be thought of as a way to just identify vulnerabilities. There's many things called vulnerability scanners. They will go out, they will identify what in your environment is vulnerable to an attack based on what we call CVEs, common vulnerability enumeration. That in layman's term is basically a list of known vulnerabilities that do have scores. And a pen test could be even more. So a pen test includes looking at your people, process, and tech. It may include social engineering tests where the outside agency may have someone actually try to social engineer, and that means just picking up the phone and trying to fool people into giving you access. Or maybe, coming into your organization with a hard hat and a clipboard looking all official, trying to get physical access to something they shouldn't have access to. It does have some requirements, like it requires multi-factor authentication. It requires that incident response plan. And by the way, these are all good cyber practices, even outside of this law. This is a very, this is not some crazy regulation that somebody came up with. This makes a lot of sense from a cybersecurity perspective. Data encryption, right? Third-party service providers. You must have a third-party risk program of sorts. You need to make sure that third parties that you work with have adequate cybersecurity measures in place too. A lot of attacks come through Change Healthcare, come through third parties. So Change Healthcare was attacked, and they are a third-party provider to many pharmacies, and that's why the pharmacies could not fulfill prescriptions, right? Training and awareness. Training and awareness can prevent a lot of bad things from happening. And then they want you to submit an annual certification to attest that you are complying with this. And Jason, you're really your boots on the ground. You're on the battlefield here. Do you have anything to add for these key points?
Yeah, no, I will say a lot of these do seem like a lot, but one thing they do stress is that it should be appropriate to your risk level. So while
Yes.
you do need all this, if you go through and validate that you don't use third-party services to provide things, well, then you don't have to do as much there because it really needs to be tailored to you. It's not just a thing you can pop into place and go, I bought the DFS package, I'm all done. It does need to be tailored to what you do, how you do business, and your specific processes.
Yeah, and that's why we say this is a business challenge because, right? Because I could have two financial institutions, right? They may be run, your board may have a different risk tolerance than this other board for another financial institution that does the same exact thing. And you may have different business objectives. So cybersecurity in general is never one size fits all. So it's a very common sense type of regulation in my opinion, in my professional opinion, right? So who is required to comply? So Jason was talking about this, right? It is any person operating under or required to operate under a license, more legal terms, under the banking law, the insurance law, or financial service law, whether or not you're regulated by another industry, right? There are some exceptions. If you have less than 20 employees and independent contractors, there are some limitations. If you have less than 7.5 million in gross annual revenue, oh, there's a typo there, revenue for the last 3 fiscal years. And if you're exempt from some specific requirements. And if you want more information on this, we are going to talk a little bit more about it, but you should really honestly get in touch with West Tech. Jason is your expert here, who has boots on the ground. So there are some important dates to be aware of, right? So, in conjunction with everyone's favorite holiday, April 15th, tax day, right? Is that your favorite holiday, Jason?
Mine are pretty basic. It's all done already.
Oh,
Hand it off to
good.
somebody. It's good.
Oh, yeah, mine's not.
Depends on what my taxes are, as if it's my tax day or not.
I know. I think long gone are the days of a refund for me anyway. You have to file your certificate of compliance or your acknowledgement of non-compliance because there may be reasons that you're non-compliant, right? Again, in April, your risk assessments are due. And honestly, your risk assessment is your first step in establishing a cyber program anyway. And that is something that we always recommend that you have at least once annually because things change all the time. The risks change, the attacks change. We have disruptors like AI come out of the woodwork, and there are new things that we have to consider every year, and honestly, more often. But at a minimum, you should have a risk assessment done once a year. By November, of this year, you should have implemented multi-factor authentication. Now, I would say that if you don't have multi-factor authentication implemented, you should implement that now. Don't wait till November. It really, I'm not trying to, my attack is not trying to discount the power of multi-factor authentication, but multi-factor authentication combined with a password manager, that is super powerful, right? You need to provide security awareness training by at least once a year by November. Again, if that's not something you've implemented, that's something you should begin working on now. That is really important. I feel that humans really are our best defense, not our weakest link, except for my husband. He's the weakest link. But he will never listen to this webinar, so nobody tell on me. So by May, we have to implement enhanced requirements. And those include things like privileged access management, identity access management. And what we're talking about here is making sure that people and your technologies only have access to the data that they need to fulfill their job. That means that things as simple as even though I do have the access to be administrator in certain situations, I should never be the administrator surfing the web on my laptop or the administrator checking my email. Because what if I make the mistake and I click on that link because I am multitasking, right? Think of it this way. What's the impact of a bad guy getting hold of regular user credentials and the impact of a bad guy getting hold of admin credentials? Eek, that's all I can say. Right? Um, you should be reviewing these accounts, and this is a good cybersecurity practice in general. Things change. There should be policies and procedures, for instance, around onboarding and offboarding employees. Sometimes employees leave, sometimes employees are terminated, and there should be procedures for dealing with that and procedures for reviewing and make sure that we didn't make a mistake and leave someone with access that they should no longer have. Maybe it could be as simple too as their job role changing. Maybe, my job role now has admin access, and then I go to another job role that doesn't require that. That means my admin access should be revoked, right? Um, Disable or security configure all protocols for remote access. Remember when I was telling you about bad guys knocking on the door? This is one of the things they're knocking on the door looking for. Can I remotely access any of your infrastructure? And then as far as IAM and PAM, I already addressed this, terminate access following terminations and have a reasonable written password policy. I mean, some of the recommendations I would make for that is things like upper lowercase characters, numbers, special characters, and a minimum number of characters. Me personally, there's lots of resources out there that'll tell you how quickly passwords can be cracked. Really, the minimum standard is 14 characters. I will tell you that unless the technology I'm working with requires less than 20, my passwords are all 20, but I use a password manager. No way on earth I could remember any of those 20 character passwords, right? So November of next year, they're going to ask you to comply with enhanced MFA requirements and implement new asset inventory requirements. It's kind of interesting that these are back November from the aspect of a cybersecurity professional. I find it really interesting that these are back here because when you're doing things like implementing the NIST cybersecurity framework, one of the first things you do is identify your inventory, what you have. Because if you don't know what you have, then you don't know how to protect it, right? So I'll turn it over to Jason for a moment while I take a sip of coffee here.
Yeah, and then I'm gonna the enhanced MFA requirements. What that actually really means to is it goes beyond MFA just for your computer. They want to see MFA on everything that stores data of a New York resident. So if you use a third-party system and you store your data there, that needs to have MFA. So yeah, that was the reason they pushed it to November 25 versus the other one, because they need those vendors to actually implement those controls.
Yeah.
So, you can see where it's a big picture where they're not only
Mhm.
trying to protect you, they're trying to get their hooks into other third parties that are going to
Yeah.
have that, I guess,
Uh-oh.
rising tide raise all boats, to get us
Right.
all better at cybersecurity.
Exactly. Yep. So, okay, let's move on there. So, oh, hold on. How did that happen? Sorry, guys. Second quiz. Just kidding. Third quiz, that would be. Okay, so I alluded to this a lot. So this is part of Defense in Depth is people, process, and tech. And the way I like to think of people, process, and tech is this is what we would refer to as a three-legged stool. What happens if one leg is shorter than the other or one leg is missing altogether? That stool's going to fall over, and so will your cyber program. Being in the financial industry, I'm sure you're very familiar with financial fraud that happens, that someone gets an email saying, hey, um, this payment needs to be sent right away. Again, we'll pick on Bob. Maybe he gets an email from the CFO and she's going on vacation and she says, hey, you're not going to be able to reach me, Bob, but I'm going to need you to send a payment to this vendor right away. We're in danger of losing all these contracts because we're behind on this payment. And if we don't make it, bad things are going to happen, right? And so what happens is Bob, for whatever reason, just sends this payment, right? And the CFO comes back from vacation, right? And she's like, excuse me, the CEO comes back from vacation, right? And she's like, and Bob's talking with her about how he saved the day, and he paid this bill. And she's like, what are you talking about, Bob? And Bob, what happened is Bob actually paid a bad guy. And the reason why Bob paid a bad guy is because there may not have been the training, right? There definitely wasn't a process for handling the changes of payments, right? He certainly had the technology, so we had something missing or altogether gone, one leg altogether missing, right? Or part of a leg, a shorter leg, right? In this case. And therefore, we were subject to this attack. And we know this financial fraud happens all the time, whether it's a vendor payment or purchase of a new equipment. Bad guys are always looking for ways to trick us into falling for their scams, right? So that's just one example. And trust me, there are many others. Again, what is that minimum acceptable technology? All of this should look really familiar to you because all of this was pretty much addressed in what we were talking about with this new regulation for New York State, right? And oh, by the way, not only is this a New York State regulation, but if you want comprehensive, affordable, and reputable cyber insurance, you need to have all these things. Notice I said only if you want those three things. Risk and responsibility. Okay, I just want to touch on this really quick. The bottom line is you as the business leader or the business owner, and this includes business leaders as well. You're ultimately responsible. And why is that? That is because you know your business objectives, you know your risk tolerance, and you know your budget. And you have to make those budgeting decisions. It's not that you're out there in the cold all alone because we're right alongside with you. This is a circle. This is not a straight line. Nobody's pointing any fingers. We're going to help you deploy technologies. We're going to help you make the correct decisions so you understand those risks and we're going to be right alongside you. But I just want to make sure that you understand that you do hold the ultimate liability because you set your business objectives, you set your risk tolerance, and you may not set your budget, but you need to abide by it. And really, it all comes down to, what risk level are you willing to accept to protect your data? And as you saw, our data has value, right? So our data has value to these bad guys. They're in it to make money, and we have to protect that. So I just want to share this really quick analogy with you guys because sometimes we cyber people, we talk in terms like I'm sure Jason and I could just talk to each other for hours. You'd have no idea what we're talking about. Would you, Andrew?
Possibly.
He would. Andrew's super smart. He just understates his qualifications, trust me. So what do we use to bridge this gap or to translate this language barrier? Well, I like to use an analogy of a house or a home. We all live in a home. Doesn't matter if it's a house, condo, apartment, whatever. So how do we protect this thing? Like I said earlier, the first thing we do is identify what it is we want to protect. Here are some of the things you probably want to protect. For me, it's my Lego. I don't know if I mentioned my Lego obsession earlier. How do we protect these things we've identified, right? This is how we protect them. Doors, windows, locks, education. In my day, it was don't answer the door to strangers. Today, it's don't friend strangers on social media, right? How do we detect if someone gets past our defenses? We may have an alarm that goes with that yard sign. Doorbell camera, for goodness sakes, if you have a Ring doorbell or any doorbell camera, be aware. There were a lot of Chinese knockoffs recently in the news that were sharing your data with the world. But even if you have a Ring through Amazon, you should have multi-factor authentication on that because there's been some news around those as well. Your nosy neighbors. How do we respond to these things? Well, me have an attack dog. I have a dog who sounds really mean, but once you get in, he's just going to lick you to death. We may decide it's too dangerous and run away, right? We may call law enforcement. We may have to protect ourselves, right? And let's round it back out to cybersecurity to say how we recover. That incident response plan we talked about, business continuity and disaster recovery, which includes components of technology like a backup, and Jason and team can advise, and Jason and Andrew and team can advise you on what that should look like, and that you should have disconnected backups. It also includes your business continuity plan, because you know what's really interesting, and this also rolls into emergency equipment and incident responders, is that cyber attacks can have kinetic consequences. I know we're not talking to the water industry today, but a few years ago, the water supply in my hometown was attacked and it was stopped by accident. But if they had poisoned the water supply, that would have been kinetic consequences. Stuxnet, right? For those of you who don't know what Stuxnet is, that was software that took malware created by the good guys that took down Iranian centrifuges and stopped Iran from processing uranium to make nuclear weapons, right? So, you may even have emergency equipment or incident responders involved. And then, of course, insurance. We all have homeowners insurance. Some of us have liability, whether it's personal or business liability. And you're going to want to have that cyber insurance too, because I'm telling you, it's going to cost much less than the cost of responding to an incident. And we call this the right cybersecurity. And I just taught you the NIST cybersecurity framework, right? We're not going to talk about governance right now, right, Jason?
That's right.
We're going to save you that drama. And here's where we come to the end of our show. And we've given you tons of info. I'm sure Jason could give tons more info. But our time with you is almost over. So I want to leave you with this. I gave you a ton of info. Your head's exploding. And what I want to tell you, as a software developer, I used to have a boss who would say perfect is the enemy of done, because software developers were crazy. And we would, have a little fun, like compete against each other. So you could do something faster, better, whatever. And he would always tell us, time out, guys. You need to do the requirements first and do what's best first. And then either go back or make recommendations to the client or what they could do better. And we'll do that. And this is a dead philosopher quote. Always makes you smart to have a dead philosopher quote in your briefing, right? And it really is that the perfect is the enemy of the good. Why am I telling you this? Well, do something. I'm just telling you this to do something. We don't have to have it perfect right now. We don't have to do everything right now. We need to start. What's the best place for you to start? We talked about it several times in this presentation, right? Start with that risk assessment. Reach out to Andrew. He's going to engage people like Jason and other people on the team who are going to help you do that assessment and create your roadmap and understand where you should start. And, and with that, I'm going to leave it for any final comments from my buddies, Jason and Andy, and Q&A.
I just want to thank everyone for going. I mean, I think you can tell Natalie and I are really passionate about security, and because we know, one, it's fun for us, and two, we know the benefits that it has, to enhance your business and just to keep you safe and protected in this world where you never know what's going to happen tomorrow. A worldwide event could all of a sudden a new one erupt out, as we talked about nation state hackers and all that. It's weird that you as a private organization have to defend against North Korea, Russia. You literally do, because they are trying to break down your doors every single day, even if you don't know it. So this seems like a lot. It seems like it's a big burden, but that's because the risk is real and it's ever present.
Yep. And SMBs, you are the backbone of the American economy. You are important, and they realize that. And we realize it too. Know the good guys have your back, and we're happy to work with you and help you out in any way. Any final words there, Andy?
No, I'm just taking all this knowledge in. It's it's a knowledge transfer for me. Well, I know some of it, and a lot of the
You know
rules
a
and
lot of
regs.
it.
I know some of it. All right, let me not be too overconfident, but I really appreciate your time. You give a realistic approach on to security and translate it into layman terms. So that's really very much appreciated.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. And with that, everyone take care, and we'll talk again soon, right?
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.